AITA for not giving my brother money for rent after my mom shamed me for prioritizing my own family. I 28 female have always tried to be a responsible person. I have 2 kids, a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old, and a husband 30 male who works just as hard as I do to keep our family afloat. We both work full-time, and every single paycheck is carefully divided between bills, savings, paying down debt, and making sure our kids have everything they need. The past few years haven't been easy, far from it. We've had moments where we were scraping by, where we had to make hard decisions about what we could afford and what had to wait. But we've been working through it, together. Slowly but surely, we're getting there. Then, a few hours ago, my phone rang. It was my younger brother, mid-20s, and the second I saw his name pop up on my screen, my stomach sank. It wasn't because I don't love him, I do, but because I knew what the call was going to be about before I even answered. And I was right. He asked me for money. Not a small amount, either. He needed $4,500 to pay his rent because he was behind and in danger of being evicted. He said things were bad, worse than ever, that if he didn't get this money, his life would completely fall apart. I could hear the desperation in his voice, and part of me ached for him, because no one wants to hear a loved one in distress. But the problem is, this wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the second or third. This has been a pattern for years. My brother has always had bad spending habits. He's always been the kind of person who lives beyond his means, who doesn't think about the consequences of his actions until he's standing at the edge of disaster, expecting someone else to pull him back. And the person who usually pulls him back? My mother. She has always enabled him, always found some excuse for why it wasn't really his fault, why he just needed one more chance. And over time, that attitude spread through the family. Everyone just accepted that my brother was someone who needed to be taken care of. And, unfortunately, I was no exception. For years, I tried to help him. I lent him money. I covered his bills when he said he was just a little short this month. I bailed him out more times than I can count, and every time, he swore it was the last time, that he had learned his lesson, that things would be different. And every time, he fell right back into the same pattern. So when he asked me this time, I said no. I told him I couldn't. That I had my own family to take care of, that $4,500 wasn't an amount of money we could just pull out of nowhere, and that, honestly, even if we could, I wasn't comfortable giving it to him. I told him I was tired of being the safety net, that at some point, he had to take responsibility for himself. He pushed back. He begged. He said that if I didn't help him, he would lose everything. But I stood my ground. I told him again that I wasn't in a position to help, and even if I was, it wasn't fair to keep expecting me to clean up his messes. He hung up on me. I was upset, but I also knew it was the right decision. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Not even an hour later, my mom called. The second I answered, she was already furious. She didn't even give me a chance to say hello before she launched into it. She accused me of being selfish, of turning my back on my family. Family comes first, she said. You could always rebuild your savings later. Your brother is in a crisis, and you're just sitting there, watching him suffer. I tried to explain. I told her that it wasn't that simple, that we weren't exactly rolling in extra cash ourselves, that we had debts and responsibilities and 2 kids to take care of. She didn't want to hear it. She kept cutting me off, telling me that I was making excuses. And then, she hit me with something that honestly left me shaking. Don't you want to show your kids what family is supposed to be? That's the kind of example you should be setting. That hurt. That really, really hurt. Because the implication was clear, she was telling me that by choosing my family, my husband and kids, over my brother, I was failing as a mother. That I was teaching my children that it was okay to turn their backs on people who needed them. That I was being a bad person, and worse, a bad parent. I told her that wasn't fair. That I was protecting my kids. That we couldn't afford to just throw around thousands of dollars, and even if we could, I wasn't going to keep feeding into my brother's never-ending cycle of bad decisions. She wouldn't listen. She kept going, getting more and more emotional, saying that I needed to grow up, that I was being cold and heartless, that I was choosing my own comfort over my brother's survival. Then, just like my brother, she hung up on me. And then she started calling the rest of the family. I didn't even have time to process before my phone started blowing up. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I barely even speak to on a regular basis, were suddenly reaching out to tell me how awful I was being. Apparently, my mom had gone on a campaign, calling everyone she could to tell them how heartless I was, how I was abandoning my brother in his time of need, how I was refusing to help him when I had the money to spare. I even got a message from one of my cousins saying, "You're his sister. It's your job to be there for him." I was overwhelmed. I sat there, just staring at my phone, feeling like the worst person in the world. Because, despite everything, I still love my family. And hearing so many of them tell me that I was a terrible person, that I was doing something cruel, made me start to doubt myself. Was I really being heartless? Was I being selfish? Should I have just given him the money and figured it out later? But then I looked over at my husband. He saw what was happening, and he didn't even hesitate. "You did the right thing," he said. "We have to put our family first." And that's the thing, I wasn't choosing myself over my brother. I was choosing my children. My husband. The life we are working so hard to build. I was choosing stability over chaos. I was choosing to break the cycle, to stop being the person who made it easy for my brother to avoid consequences. I don't know what's going to happen now. My mom still isn't speaking to me. The rest of the family is still whispering. My brother is still in trouble. But I can't fix his life for him. I won't. And even though it hurts, I know I made the right choice. Update 1. I truly thought that after everything, after the fight with my mom, after standing my ground, after making it painfully clear that I was not going to give in, my brother would finally understand that I wasn't going to change my position. That this time was different. That the endless cycle of asking, begging, guilting, and manipulating had finally come to an end. I believed, naively, that my refusal would be enough to make him realize that he needed to figure things out on his own. But I was wrong. 2 days after my mom and I had our fight, I was in the middle of making dinner when my phone buzzed. It was a message from a friend I hadn't spoken to in months, someone I was friendly with but not particularly close to. That alone was strange enough, but the message itself sent a chill through me. She asked, "Hey, is your brother okay?" He wrote to me on Instagram and said that he is in real trouble. He said that you don't want to help him and that he doesn't know who to turn to. My heart sank. He had actually started reaching out to my friends. Not our mutual friends. Not people he had any connection to. My friends. People he barely knew, people I hadn't even spoken to about this situation, people who had no reason to be involved. And what's worse, he wasn't just asking for help, he was setting the stage, painting a picture where I was the villain, where I was heartlessly ignoring his suffering, where he had been forced to turn to complete strangers because his own sister had abandoned him. I could already picture how he had framed it. He wouldn't have said outright that I refused to give him money, no, that would make him look bad. Instead, he would have framed it in a way that made me seem cold and uncaring, that made him seem like a desperate, struggling man left with no options. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was fishing for sympathy, hoping that someone, anyone, would step in where I refused to. I felt a surge of anger, but more than that, I felt hurt. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about him being willing to drag my name through the mud, to involve people who had no business being involved, all because I wouldn't let him continue his pattern of bad decisions. I quickly replied to my friend, telling her that this wasn't her problem and that I would take care of it. She didn't push further, just said she was checking in, but I could already feel the damage being done. If he had reached out to her, how many other people had he contacted? How many other friends, acquaintances, co-workers, how many people were now hearing some half-truth version of this story, thinking that I had turned my back on my own brother in his darkest hour? And the worst part? He didn't stop. The next day, my husband was the one who got a message. I was in the other room when he walked in and handed me his phone, his expression unreadable. I took it, already bracing myself for whatever it was, but even then, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. It was my brother. He had actually reached out to my husband directly, and the message made my stomach turn. "Dude, I know she is stubborn, but you are a man, you understand. She is just emotional right now, talk to her. It's not that much money for you, but it is very important to me. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. He wasn't just going behind my back, he was trying to frame this as if I was being irrational, as if I was some overly emotional woman who needed to be talked down by her reasonable husband. As if my decision wasn't based on years of frustration, exhaustion, and self-preservation, but rather on some fleeting, illogical reaction. And worse, he was trying to manipulate my husband into stepping in, into pressuring me the way my mother had, as if the only reason I had said no was because I was being difficult. My husband sighed, shaking his head, and told me he wasn't even going to respond. That it wasn't worth engaging. That no matter what my brother said, he wasn't going to be dragged into this game. And I was grateful, so grateful, that he was on my side, that he didn't fall for the same tactics that had worked so well on others. But that didn't take away the sting. Because this wasn't just about asking for help anymore. This was about control. This was about my brother refusing to accept my boundaries. This was about him believing, deep down, that if he just pushed hard enough, if he just found the right angle, if he just pulled the right strings, I would eventually cave. That if he couldn't guilt me into it directly, he would go around me. That if he couldn't make me feel bad enough, he would find someone else who could. And that was the moment it became clear to me, painfully, undeniably clear, that he didn't just take no for an answer, he was willing to manipulate anyone just to get money. Update 2. The following week, I was beginning to think the worst had passed. My brother had already tried everything, guilt-tripping, emotional manipulation, playing the victim, even trying to go through my husband, but I hadn't given in. I had stayed firm. And while I knew my mother was still sulking and my extended family was probably still whispering about how I was the heartless sister who abandoned her brother, I was trying to move forward. I was exhausted, drained from the endless back and forth, but I was at peace with my decision. I had told him no. He had to deal with it. Then, another message came in. This time, it wasn't from my brother, my mom, or even one of my cousins who had already inserted themselves into the situation. It was from my aunt. Someone I wasn't particularly close to, someone I rarely spoke to unless it was at a family gathering. That alone was enough to make my stomach tighten, but as soon as I read the message, my blood ran cold. She said she didn't want to interfere, but my brother had told her something that made her feel she had to reach out. According to him, I had borrowed money from him a few months ago and was now simply refusing to return it. He had told her that it was unfair, how I had no problem taking advantage of his kindness when it suited me, but now that he was struggling, I wouldn't even help him. He had framed it as if he had been the generous one, the supportive sibling, and now I was betraying him by refusing to give him the same courtesy in return. I froze, staring at my screen. Took money from him? That was a complete and utter lie. There had never been a moment in my life where I had borrowed money from my brother. If anything, it had always been the other way around. I was the one who had lent him money over the years, the one who had covered for him, the one who had been there when he needed financial help. And now, because I had refused to continue enabling him, he had decided to rewrite history. Anger surged through me like a wildfire. It wasn't enough that he had begged and pleaded. It wasn't enough that he had involved my mom, my husband, and even my friends. Now, he had resorted to outright lies, to spreading falsehoods in an attempt to corner me, to make me look like the bad guy, to force me into a situation where I would have to defend myself against accusations that were entirely fabricated. I didn't hesitate. I immediately messaged him, demanding to know if he was seriously going around telling people that I owed him money. His response came almost instantly, as if he had been waiting for me to react. He didn't deny it. Instead, he twisted it further, saying that if I wasn't willing to help him out of kindness, maybe it would be easier for me to do so under the guise of repaying a debt. My vision blurred with rage. He wasn't just desperate. He was calculated. He thought that if he spread this lie far enough, if enough people started to believe it, I would cave, not because I felt guilty, but because I would be backed into a corner, forced to pay him just to salvage my own reputation. It was no longer about asking for help. It was about control. About forcing my hand. About proving that, no matter what I said, no matter how many times I said no, he could still manipulate me into giving him what he wanted. But he was sorely mistaken. I immediately responded to my aunt, telling her in no uncertain terms that it was a complete lie. That I had never borrowed a cent from him, that if he had said anything different, it was pure manipulation, a desperate attempt to get money from me. I told her that I was sorry she had been dragged into this, but I wasn't going to entertain these kinds of tactics. She read the message. But she didn't respond. That was when I realized the true weight of what was happening. My brother wasn't just asking for help anymore. He wasn't just pleading for support. He was willing to burn every bridge, to destroy my reputation within the family, to turn people against me, all to get his way. And the worst part? Some of them would probably believe him. Some of them, despite everything, would take his word over mine. That was the part that hurt the most. Not his lies. Not his attempts to manipulate me. But the knowledge that there would be people who had known me my entire life, who would be willing to think I was capable of doing something so awful. That there would be family members who wouldn't even ask for my side of the story, who would just hear his version and assume the worst about me. But even after that, he did not get a cent from me. Update 3. 2 weeks passed, and the storm that my brother had created began to settle, at least on the surface. The constant buzzing of my phone had faded into silence. No more messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, no more guilt-ridden paragraphs from distant relatives demanding that I reconsider, no more attempts from my brother to twist reality in his favor. It was as if the chaos had simply burned itself out. The family, always eager to latch on to drama, had seemingly moved on to the next topic of conversation. The absence of their judgment should have brought relief. And in a way, it did. But the damage had already been done. I had spent those weeks feeling like I was standing trial for a crime I never committed, a crime I wasn't even capable of committing. The weight of defending myself, of standing firm while being painted as the villain, had exhausted me in a way that no amount of sleep could fix. But still, I held my ground. I refused to break. My husband and I returned to our routine. Work, bills, the never-ending chaos that came with raising 2 kids who were still too young to understand the weight of everything happening around them. It felt good to focus on something real, something tangible. Something that wasn't tangled up in manipulation and betrayal. My children needed me. My husband needed me. And more than anything, I needed to reclaim my own sense of stability after weeks of emotional exhaustion. I told myself it was over. That I had done everything I could to stand my ground. That whatever remained, whatever lingering resentment or gossip still floated through my family, was out of my hands. I had drawn a line, and I had refused to let it be crossed. My brother would have to figure things out on his own. My mother would have to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to be manipulated into sacrificing my own well-being for the sake of enabling his poor decisions. And then, out of nowhere, my phone lit up with my mother's number. I hesitated before answering. Every interaction with her over the past few weeks had been drenched in anger, laced with passive-aggressive accusations and outright hostility. The words still echoed in my mind: selfish, heartless, abandoning your own blood. I had been bracing myself for every call, every message, knowing that any attempt at conversation would spiral into another battle where the conclusion had already been decided. But this time, something was different. The moment I picked up, I knew it. There was no sharp edge to her voice, no venom laced into her words. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't crying. She wasn't demanding that I do better, that I fix what I had broken, that I apologize for a choice that I knew, deep in my bones, had been the right one. She was calm. Unusually calm. She told me that my brother had finally gotten the money. For a moment, I didn't react. The words didn't quite register. It felt like a trap, like there was something unsaid lurking beneath the surface, waiting to pounce the moment I let my guard down. I wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or suspicious. I hadn't given in. I hadn't budged. So where had the money come from? Had he taken out a loan? Had he managed to manipulate someone else into giving him what he wanted? I didn't even have time to ask before she answered the unspoken question. She had given it to him. She had the money all along. I sat there, gripping my phone, feeling the weight of her words settle over me like a lead blanket. She had it. The whole time. While she was berating me, while she was calling me selfish, while she was turning family against me, making me feel like the worst person in the world, she had the money. She could have helped him at any moment. She could have stopped all of this before it spiraled into a full-blown war. But she didn't. She let it unfold, let me take the brunt of the blame, let me become the villain in a story she was orchestrating. And then she said it, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, as if it were a fact that should have been understood from the very beginning. She wanted to see what I would do. She wanted to see how much my brother mattered to me. She wanted to know how important family was to me. I sat in stunned silence, my grip tightening around my phone, my jaw clenched so tightly it ached. All this time, all this stress, all these sleepless nights spent wondering how much damage had been done to my relationships, all the arguments with my husband, the deep ache of knowing that people I had once trusted were so quick to turn against me, it wasn't just about helping my brother. It was a test. A test to see if I would sacrifice my own financial stability. A test to see if I would cave under pressure. A test to see if I was willing to do what she thought was the right thing. And I had failed. A mixture of emotions hit me all at once, anger, resentment, relief, disbelief. It felt like I had been set up, like I had been pushed into a corner for someone else's amusement, like I had spent the last few weeks defending myself, justifying my choices, trying to keep my head above water while my own mother stood on the shore and watched, waiting to see if I would drown or save myself. She had watched as my brother harassed me, as he reached out to my friends, as he lied to our family, as he tried to manipulate my husband. She had let it happen, knowing that she could have ended it at any time, knowing that she had the power to shut it all down. But she didn't. Because in her mind, this wasn't about money. This was about loyalty. About obedience. About proving that I was willing to follow the same twisted rules that had been passed down in our family for generations. Because I had refused to give in, because I had drawn a boundary, because I had chosen my own family's well-being over my brother's never-ending financial disasters, I had failed. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain myself. There was nothing left to say. Any words I gave her would fall on deaf ears because she had already decided what she wanted to believe. In her eyes, my role was to be the one who sacrificed, the one who fixed things, the one who gave without question. And because I hadn't played the part she expected me to, she saw me as the disappointment. But what she didn't realize was that this was the moment I stopped caring about her approval. All my life, I had been conditioned to believe that family loyalty meant self-sacrifice. That being a good daughter, a good sister, meant putting myself last. That no matter how much my brother took, no matter how much he lied or manipulated or made reckless choices, my job was to pick up the pieces. But this time, I had said no. And I had held that boundary, despite every guilt trip, every attempt to twist the narrative, every lie that was spread about me. And now, I knew for certain, I was done. I wasn't going to make excuses to my mother anymore. I wasn't going to feel guilty for the choice I made. She might think I was selfish. My brother might think I betrayed him. The rest of the family might have their own opinions. But I knew I did the right thing.